Well, so this college admissions scam has raised questions that go beyond class. Now we're talking about race, affirmative action, and privilege.
Many commentators have suggested that the scandal has exposed systemic racial issues in America's education system. So for more on this, we want to bring in Rashad Robinson. He's the president for Color of Change, and he's with us now from Washington. Rashad, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, maybe the first thing I want to get is just your gut reaction when you heard about this scandal.
Well, my gut reaction was, disappointment, outrage, but not really surprise. We recognize deeply that the rules are flawed. The rules are rigged in many different ways. There's all sorts of ways in which privilege, access, money, and race determines outcomes and determines opportunity in this country for so many. And so, this sort of expose, the news that came from the Justice Department was a confirmation of so many stories and so many deep understanding that people know. We also think that it's just the tip of the iceberg. Singer was not some deep mastermind to have been the only person to do it. The fact that so many folks were willing to take this bribe suggests that there are probably other stories. And so, I do think that, as those in law enforcement and those in the news and journalist industry continue to dig in, I believe we will have more stories similar that really speak to all the ways in which inequity is baked into our system.
So what we're looking at here is illegal. What happened in this scam was breaking the law. But what does the scandal tell you about race and the college admissions process?
Well, this is breaking the law, and what it also tells us about what so many other things that are actually legal in part. I mean, one of the things that was said when this, when the kind of announcement was made by the Justice Department was there was sort of a throwaway line almost around, it wasn't like they, did the kind of the acceptable thing, which was buy a building or make a donation, and to paraphrase the Justice Department, and so that is completely legal and acceptable in this country. Harvard University, by the statistics that we've seen, accepts more legacy students than black students, and so looking at sort of what does it mean to benefit from birth, have opportunities handed to you over and over again, and not have to work for them, this kind of continues to send a message. It also speaks to the lack of rigor that major institutions have had at really dealing with inequality. The fact that, universities could allow this to happen, and so I'm not going to let these universities off the hook. The fact that these were baked into sort of polo or crew or other sort of sports that don't exist in urban and inner city schools and schools with high minority populations. The fact that the system was so open to be rigged in a university that is charged with honest pursuit of the truth and rigorous thinking couldn't sort of look at all of the ways in which there were gaps and holes in their structures and be willing to actually deal with them. And so, I think the universities actually are deeply responsible for these problems, as well, as the folks that took the bribes, and as well as the people who gamed the system.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the conversation in relation to affirmative action that has come up here. Affirmative action has really been taking some hits in the Supreme Court and in public conversation. Do we really need this anymore? And in fact, now we have an affirmative action case that has been brought forward by Asian students who say that they are being treated unfairly, particularly when it comes to disciplines like maths and sciences, and that they're not getting a fair shake. And I want to ask you, in terms of the affirmative action conversation, how does this fold into that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing about the current affirmative action case to know is that the folks, the organization and the money behind this case are the same people that have been behind the failed cases, and they just sort of went back and organized a set of Asian students when there's a whole sort of other set of Asian students that have been pushing back against this case and actually pushing back to make sure that this is not done in their name. I think a lot of what this says about sort of, whether or not we get too deep into the policies of affirmative action. At the heart of it, what this story really sort of elevates is how do we ensure that we have equity baked into our system and that we have policies and practices to ensure that we are actually dealing with all the deep inequalities that exist in our system for people from birth, and that opportunity in this country is not based on your zip code or your race or who your parents were, but it's based on the sort of all the things that you're able to do and accomplish, and that the work that you do to overcome circumstances is also baked into your opportunity. What we will continue to get is a country that how you start off is how you end, and that is not the type of country that I think most Americans want. And so I really deeply believe that as we think about sort of whether it's issues like affirmative action, whether it's programs that ensure deep access to opportunity, institutions that purport to be about higher education have to be responsible for ensuring that there's equity and opportunity for all. And if they don't do it, there's organizations like mine, civil rights organizations, that will raise our voices, that will push back, and that will hold them accountable. And that has to be the standard by which all of us look at any of these policy debates. What are we actually doing to ensure that there's a field of opportunity for all of us, that justice and opportunity is truly real?
Rashad, I want to ask you a question. I sort of feel like we're almost living in a time, at least now, where I feel like the curtain's being pulled back, and we're seeing inequality in a way that we hadn't seen it before. We're learning about these payoffs, and we're learning about what wealthy businessmen might be doing in terms of their finances to get a leg up, and what's happening in private schools across the country with the Supreme Court justice hearing. Do you think that this is just a blip? Or do you think we're going to see a serious change, a permanent change moving forward?
I don't think we will see a permanent change unless we actually change policies and laws. This is about a set of rules that makes it completely acceptable. Like as we were just talking about, it's unclear whether or not some of these things that people are finding deeply egregious are illegal. We know the sort of payoffs, the IRS payoffs is sort of how people got caught, but there's all sorts of ways in which people game the system every day. The ruling that we've seen in the Metaphor case, where white-collar crimes are treated one way, and people who are, selling low amounts of marijuana are getting more time than people who are, gaming the system and doing work to sort of push against our country's values and our national security. So who gets the benefit of the doubt in this country? Who has opportunity for a second chance? How do we hold the banks who stole people's homes basically during the housing crisis and contributed to basically black wealth being at its lowest rate in well over 20 years. 75% of black wealth was lost during the housing crisis because of shady actions behind major corporations, and nobody went to jail for that. Nobody paid the price. We have deeply unequal systems across many different sectors in this country, and until we actually change the rules, because the rules have been written by those in power, and they have been written by those in power to serve their political and economic interests, and until we actually build the type of energy, and we have a presidential election coming up, we have lots of opportunity to take these stories and talk about the rules. But if we just think it's only happening, that rich people are only gaming the system when it comes to their kids getting into college, and it just started then and it just ended then we are being deeply naive about how opportunity and power works in this country. And if we truly want a country that starts to move towards meritocracy, it's a long way away, then we actually have to bake in real rule changes. We have to bake in real work to change the structures that far too often hold people back and give folks unequal treatment and unequal advantages.
Rashad Robinson, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rashad.
Thanks for having me.